Yeah.
That's right.
Occupy is here. Occupy is us. So for those who were not paying attention, Occupy is back here in Union Square, as well as downtown at Liberty Square, and here at Union Square, in a way, it's our sole place to be. We all know a bit of the history of Union Square and who's spoken here and who's been here. And it was just about 100 years ago that Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman and Big Bill Haywood and the representatives of the Ludlow strikers from Colorado were here. And you know, it was a site for the homeless, a site for labor struggles, and a site for freedom, always. So I think this is a really great place for Occupy, and welcome, welcome, welcome. We're here from Chicago, as you know, where NATO has decided to visit our fair city on May 20th.
Please
So
come.
we want to come here, and we want you to come there, but at least to tell your friends that it's very important that we welcome NATO and tell them that they have to dissolve and disband, that NATO is really a threat to the planet. And we've been doing a bit of research and work on trying to understand what NATO is. And I realized that it's kind of background noise. If you listen to the news, you hear NATO forces bombed, NATO forces invaded, NATO forces bombed. But what is it? And it certainly isn't the North Atlantic Treaty Organization of my childhood. It is, in fact, the world's largest military coalition, multinational military coalition ever established. It is a cover, really, for the massive expansion of U.S. military power in the world. I was calling it a fig leaf, and a friend of mine said we really should be calling it a shroud, not a fig leaf, because NATO is the site of the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world, tactical nuclear weapons. It is, in fact, become a second U.S. military, or, you know, a huge expansion of the U.S. military. It is, a friend's been calling it the private police force, the private military force of the global 1%. So I think that's the easiest thing to remember, and to remember, therefore, why it's not our friend. It has nothing to do with security and protection, except for the very rich and for the resources, to plunder the resources of the world. So that brings me just back to one thing I thought I'd bring up, and we can talk about whatever you like, which is that the military forces, the paramilitary police forces surrounding you and surrounding Occupy. You all know very well, because you're living it, that the Homeland Security coordinated nationally with the mayors around the country to come up with a strategy to disperse and to eliminate Occupy as a spirit, as a force, as an imaginative idea, as a liberatory possibility. And I think in a declining empire, which, you know, the United States is, let's agree, the United States is a declining economic and political power, even while it's a virulent and expanding military power, a very dangerous combination. But in that, I just want to suggest that I think that what looks very strong is often very weak. It is very weak, even though this military force, the United States is Sparta, yes, in many ways. National security is the issue of it's all the United States seems to have to offer. It isn't jobs or healthcare or public education or public parks or public libraries. It's security, security, security. So we don't want that kind of a future. Occupy doesn't want that kind of a future. We want a future for the 99%. And I think if you just keep your spirits up, that they, of course, are going to try to deny you and ignore you and ridicule you and push you out and pin us in all the time. But they're very weak too, and your spirit is very strong. So onward, come to Chicago. We're coming back here. Occupy, occupy, occupy.
Thank you.
Good.
All right.
Veteran!
Did I say something?
Well, just to add a couple of quick things. Agreeing with, Bernadine evoked Chicago. Bernadine evoked the spirit of Chicago. Chicago is, the city of Jane Addams, the city of Ida B. Wells Barnett, the city of Studs Terkel, the city of, resistance, and the city of the immigration rights demonstrations, which were prelude to Occupy, and as was the Arab Spring, as have been so many other kinds of things. So we're all part of a global movement. I just want to say one thing about Bernadine, if I could. Um,
We've only been together 40 years, so
yeah, but
I
was
don't
just
know what's
thinking,
coming. I don't know what's coming.
When you evoked that, though, I remembered that J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI chief, in the 20s, he called Jane Addams the most dangerous woman in America.
He did.
And in the 70s, he called her the most dangerous woman in America. Shake your hand, please. Who knows which of you young people will be called the most dangerous woman in America soon? And I hope it's you. In any case, I think it's really, just to pick up on one theme, we are living in a militarized society. It's clear what the message is from power. The message is that Occupy represents violence and marginalization and insanity, when in reality, it's the 1% that represents violence and insanity and militarism. We've got a militarized society, and it's become so common sense that getting on the airplane coming out here, the first thing they said was, let all the uniformed military get on first and thank you for your service. And I said, as I always do, let's let the teachers and nurses get on first and thank them for their service. I mean, why is it everything military has got to be good, and everything that has to do with actual work, real work, not jobs, real work for people, that stuff gets discouraged and marginalized and beat up and disorganized and so on. I think it's hugely important that we see ourselves, all of us together, as in a moment of movement building. What's been great about Occupy, and who could have predicted, honestly, even those of you who embraced it from the start and initiated, who could have predicted that you would have done one of the very essential points of movement building, which is to shift the conversation. Suddenly, 1%, 99% makes sense. It's in the vocabulary. Suddenly, Mitt Romney's tax returns have some meaning. Suddenly, Bloomberg is seen as the rich bastard that he is, and that's some kind of mayor of the people. So this is already being done. The other thing you've done that's so important in movement building is connect the issues. So Occupy is it's not a point of arrival, it's an invitation. It's a celebration. It's every grievance can come into the public square because you've opened the public square. But we have another job, and that is organizing. We have to organize. We cannot simply say because we've demonstrated, because we've expressed ourselves, that that's enough. And organizing always involves the hard, difficult work of talking to strangers, of trying to remake the argument. I'm convinced, I've been convinced for years, and a lot of people, including Bernadine sometimes, think I'm delusional. But
No.
I've always believed that we are in the majority. I've always believed that. So we get marginalized all the time. I think 2/3 of Americans today want us out of Iraq, and yet, what are the powerful doing? Talking about bombing Iran. Two-thirds of Americans want us out of Afghanistan, and yet talk of permanent war is everywhere. So we are the majority on the issue of war. We're the majority on the issue of gun violence. We're the majority on the issue of queer rights and women's rights and human rights. We're in the majority. So we have to stop thinking of ourselves as barricaded and as somehow representing a precious kind of knowledge that only we can understand. And we have to get out and start talking to people.
Yes, but I think
and
part
bringing
of
them
the
in.
talking is agitation. And
Absolutely.
Agitation lights up the truth, and what Occupy has done by agitating in its nonviolent, beautiful,
Direct
imaginative way is to teach by shifting the frame, really by reimagining what's possible. And what's possible is that capitalism cannot solve our problems. It cannot solve any of our problems. And the empire is in peril, right? Who are the emerging countries in the world? They're the BRIC nations, really. And so the United States and Europe are freaking out, and they're holding on to their military power. So just want to keep us imagining that talking and educating and organizing goes with agitating, with direct action, with manifesting what we want to be. So stop.
I just wanted to say I love the point you made at the very beginning about the state and the 1% and the elites are actually much more vulnerable than we sometimes imagine.
Well,
And there's going to be a quiz. I want to ask everybody at some point to think of a way in which the system and the elites that control it really are much more vulnerable than we normally think of. I think that's a wonderful conversation to have, to practice thinking about where are they vulnerable, specifically.
I'll give you an example. Our son, we have 3 sons, right, who grew up hearing political discussion their whole lives around our dinner table and around in our kitchen. And when the Arab Spring happened in Tunisia, and particularly in Cairo, where that extended global coverage, where you could watch it on your computer 24/7 and see it, our sons were very frightened. They were like, they're going to be crushed. This is one of the biggest military powers in the world, the second biggest recipient, Egypt, of U.S. foreign aid and military aid. They're going to be crushed. And they have never, and your generations, have never really seen a country with that kind of power and force not go down, but at least the head get decapitated, right? A lot of the head get decapitated. And so that's by popular power, by literally millions of people returning and taking a public space as you did. And I think that's important to see. Now, there's still endless struggle to be had in Egypt, of course, but nonetheless, that was popular power revealing the tremendous rot and weakness of the system. And that's what we've got here too. It's obvious. People don't believe in the political process. And you're going to be beset, not only by the police forces and the military forces here, but by a lot of forces that want to occupy. The Democratic Party, the electoral forces, sectarian organizations. But your brilliance was your independence. The brilliance is in your independence. Allies, coalitions, getting bigger, embracing other organizations, of course, but stay fiercely independent.
I have another couple of thoughts. One is, don't look to the New York Times to affirm you. Do not look to the media to affirm you. They've figured it out. Sure, initially, if it bleeds, it leads, initially. But now everybody's got it. They're not going to give you what you want. And we need to build our own integrity. That's what lasts. Yeah. And you know this. Okay. Yeah. I was in Greece shortly before the Greece uprising happened, and I had the great privilege of meeting with Manolis Glessos, who's in his 90s. And at the age of 14, he took the Nazi flag off the Acropolis when the Germans were occupying Greece. He became a mayor of a small island in Greece, and he ran it like the old Greek democracy as a meeting of the whole, a mic check kind of situation. And the way they got people to do the various kind of jobs that a city government has to do was by lottery. If you want to know who was the sanitation commissioner, you picked a lot out, and maybe you were sanitation commissioner. Why not? That's what democracy is. I remember when we had the recent mayoral election, and we didn't elect. I mean, Mayor Rahm Emanuel seized power. But I remember it's all through that campaign saying, why do we need a mayor? And you talk to people and they say, well, geez, we need a mayor. Can you imagine a world without a mayor? I mean, what does the mayor do? He cuts ribbons. What else? I don't know. But we need a mayor. So I'm talking to this guy, Manolis Glessos. We're over coffee. Old, beautiful old man now. In his 90s, he's spent 18 years in prison, tortured by the Nazis, tortured by the junta. A lovely, humane, decent guy.
Who goes swimming every day.
Yeah, he just swims in the sea every day. Lovely guy. Manolis Glessos says to me, you know what the biggest obstacle in Greece and in the United States is to revolution? I said, what do you think? He said, confidence. Confidence that we, the people, can actually live our own lives, can actually control our own situation, that we don't need others. We don't need to petition power. We need to build power. And his point was really something we think about a lot. We spend way too much time looking at the power we have no access to. The White House, the Congress, the Pentagon. That's the power we don't have access to. We spend too little time looking at the power we have absolute access to. And that's the power of the street, the classroom, the university, the workplace. That's where we have to build.
Perfect. What do you guys think? What do you want?
Yeah, go ahead. Onward. Yes, sir.
I just like
Vietnam vet.
Vietnam vet, right? I live out in Queens, and I was with Occupy Wall Street since day one, September 17th, and watched them enter the park from Bowling Green Square where they were. And I made it my own mission to come down every morning at sunrise And now instead of Zuccotti Park, I come down here every morning, and I see young people who have put up with harassment all night. And I always ask them, how many arrests were there? I found out this morning that there were 2 arrests last night. It's constant harassment. But you know what's great about Occupy? You lose your fear of these suckers.
Yeah.
They don't realize we're not afraid of them anymore. Exactly. And that's a beautiful thing. And I hope everybody gets that kind of courage and confidence.
I would love to speak.
Gentlemen.
My name is Michael Bell. I'm from Occupy Monterey since October of last year.
Welcome.
And we have been disbanded. I have a 21-foot motorhome, and I just got into New York, and I'm really excited to be here to support everybody, or to support us. I'm a channel of spirit. In the metaphysical world, I'm known as clairaudient. I hear the voice of spirits. And they gave me, which I want you to all go to, Occupy Perma-Solution for Humanity. Occupy Perma-Solution for Humanity, and it will give this dream that Spirit says has been prophesied in the Bible in 1 Corinthians 14, and I'm not going to get into it, but look at, if you got a Bible, look at it. Perma-Solution for Humanity the basis is getting us self-sustainable in permaculture and eco-villages.
Okay, which is
Our problem,
which is good.
oh, nervous. I've never done this.
I can tell.
Honest to God, but I'm letting go of my fear for one that, you know, I actually hear the voice of Jesus Christ, or at least the Spirit, the guy that walked as. I also channel the goddess Isis. And so this is God's prophecy that they want to happen, and it will go global, becoming self-sustainable.
Thank you.
And oh, my heart is just racing. Thank you. Occupy Perma-Solution for Humanity. Please go to it, and it's brilliant.
So I'm going to ask the question
You
I
said,
asked
wait, hold on. You said that your occupation was disbanded.
All right, Matt.
Yes.
What?
If you want to take it offline, that's great.
I just wanted to say something nice to him.
You're live
I wanna-
streaming?
Yes.
Yes.
You're brilliant.
You're not disbanded. The occupation may be disbanded. Your group is not. That's all.
Well
Cool.
said, yes.
All right. We can.
We're leaving. We're leaving. We're running away.
That's odd. Okay. What's going on now?
I'm sorry.
It's not over.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I want to say goodbye to
We'll just. Okay. That was weird.
Which the current system and the people who control things. What are some ways in which they're more vulnerable than we normally think of them as being? If people want to think together about that question, I think it's an exciting thing to be considering. Do you have something to say about that?
I think a system that becomes more repressive, every time it stretches its arm to be more repressive, it's really showing more weakness. Now, the reason being is that when you have a state of affairs, if you look at it in the opposite way, if you have a state of affairs where they don't have to be at arms, they don't have to be up in your face, it's because the system has a certain passivity. The majority of people are disconnected. They are, or maybe their economic situation is maybe that good, they don't really care. So when the system shows its nails, it shows the hardware all the time, it is showing in fact its weakness. Because if you look at dictators in the South, dictators around the world, how were they? They expressed themselves, they closed every space, they closed every opportunity, and they controlled everything.
So is what you're saying that power structures lose a lot of credibility if they actually have to use force?
Not only do they lose credibility, but what they are trying to do is to stem the development, because they see the change coming and they want to make sure that they are up in arms in your face. And what they're really doing is they are pushing you to deal with one kind of language. They are telling you that I'm going to apply violence. If you want to deal with me, you're going to have to deal with me violently. So you have to be very careful. That's the only point they have. It's like Bernadine says, it's like security, security, security. And really security in every society is the equal opportunity for everyone in the society. So when that is lost, that's what you're seeing. And this is why you're seeing the Patriot Act, you're seeing the National Defense Authorization Act, you're seeing all the elements of a dictatorial state because they are trying to stop the process. And the process is ongoing. It's ongoing.
So do you have reactions? Do either one of you have reactions to that?
I think
Oh, you would have thought. Okay.
Well, I just have a question.
Shout it
Great.
out.
Go ahead.
What ideas do you have for dealing with police repression and this pushback from the state and the 1% beyond the obvious head-on confrontation, which they have money and technology and huge numbers, and there are times where a direct standoff is an effective strategic tactic. But over time, I think it becomes a war of attrition just because they have so much. We need to outsmart them rather than just try to meet their brute force with our
Reaction.
with our bodies.
Reaction to.
Let's assume this is a question for everyone
It
here,
is.
not
That's
just
what
for
I
the,
think.
not just
It's
the
a
group.
question for everybody.
It is a question.
I mean, one of the thoughts. Do you want to say something?
Open up physically a little bit.
One of the things that I think is one of the problems with the way we talk and write about history is that we assume that this is the first time we faced that question, when in reality, that's a question we face constantly. The civil rights movement is now talked about as if it just was a completely clean and easy arc that started here, and then once upon a time there was a bad time in America when there was apartheid and some racist people, and then a saint came along and had a dream and led a boycott, and now we're all perfect. That never happened, and nothing like that happened. So you take examples as metaphors, like the Selma Bridge. I mean, that was one of the things that the movement was brilliant about, was when the repression came, keeping the content of what they were fighting for out front. So it wasn't just a question of fighting the police. For what? What is it we're fighting about? What is it we're trying to dramatize? And as King often said, when he was always encouraged to calm down, to slow down, but he often said,
to leave town.
and to leave town.
Yeah.
In Chicago, Chicago loves it. We all love to embrace Martin Luther King today. When he came to Chicago, you go back and read the editorials in the Chicago Tribune, outside agitator, communist sympathizer, all the rest of it. But the fact is that they kept the content up front, and they had the ability to think of it as a public performance. So King always said, there's violence in the system. We need to expose the violence that's already there. It's not a question of we're being violent, it's a question of direct action that makes them show who they are. And what are we fighting for? Simple justice. And we have to kind of keep our message very clear. That's the other thing. If you look
Also, I would say that one of the things that the civil rights movement taught us, and then the anti-war movement taught us, and then the women's movement learned it, and then the environmental movement learned it, and the gay rights movement learned it, and the Native American movement, is that on some levels you have to escalate, and the escalation isn't about violence, but if you're lucky, it's about numbers. So, at the same time that Occupy grew in New York, it multiplied around the country, right? It was imitatable, and it expressed a longing that people have for liberation and for freedom, and an opportunity to fulfill, our own. People are longing to do justice and to make meaning out of their lives. Everybody isn't happy without meaning. It really just isn't true. And so I think the notion that you crystallize as Occupy is to make that meaning. And I think if you keep that in the front of your mind, and as Bill says, keep the content of who you are, the 99%, the military force of the 1%, clear here as it is around the world. And, the local and the global, constantly back and forth. It doesn't tell you what to do in the face of them removing every night. But when there's 5,000 people here, it's harder to remove. They have to think about it. And once they think about it, it takes off. And so,
Let me add one thing. At the risk of being a retired teacher, which I am, and a retired professor, I think that we have to think about Occupy and every moment of Occupy as pedagogical moments, that is, teaching moments. And the judgment that we pass on ourselves, the way that we think, criticize, doubt whether we've done everything right, is we ask ourselves a simple pedagogical question. Did I learn something, and did I teach something? If all it is performance for my own self-righteous feeling, that's not good enough. The question is, did I teach and did I learn? And the fact is, you can't know that in advance. So you try this, you try that. But all kinds of things we can look at historically that seem small at the moment but taught millions of people something. That's what we have to hope for. We have to keep trying, keep being tactically flexible, keep being direct action that exposes the violence that's in the situation and exposes the power that's
See,
in the
I
situation.
think one response here is that this is a public park. We are the public, and the privatization of the public space is what's happening everywhere. That's something people can see, and no matter where they
In their own
live,
lives.
or even politically what they think. And this is a public space, and it is open to the public. In its beauty, it has the drummers and the breakdancers and people wheeling their baby carriages, and it has the whole thing, right? The whole human drama going on here. And it also has political action, especially this holy ground right here, this sacred revolutionary site. So the claiming of it, I would say this is a public space and we claim it. More than, we're victims of police repression. That is a given, in my opinion. That's a given because they are afraid of you. And if you think of it that way, I think that helps you. When I say that they're very weak at the same time that the 1%, the mayor, the military forces of this country. Today's headlines say that the 3 leading banks are fragile and falling, right? They're collapsing again. So JP Morgan, Chase, and Bank of America. This is, so how strong are they? What's going on here, right? It is weak. It is weak. They can't recover from the crisis, from the economic crisis, and so there's constant manufacturing of illusions about if we only buy more, we'll do better, and why the oil prices are up. So, just truth-telling, I think, makes you dangerous. Non-violent, sweet, gentle, dangerous, because the idea that there has to be another way and that it's not in their control is very dangerous.
I'm kind of streaming, so I want to give everyone else a chance to speak first.
Yeah.
Right here.
All right, cool. He also wants to speak as well, but cool. Go ahead.
I just want to make a statement for a couple of minutes. When Occupy started in Wall Street, I was asked by Code Pink to speak at one of the teach-ins. And when I spoke in front of about 150 young people, I looked down at them and I saw myself in 1963 trying to sponge up as much as I could learn after I got out of the military. I was a young boy of 23 years old. What I want to say is, I really had nothing to say to the young people. They were saying it to me.
Exactly.
And I was listening. And it was so, how would you say it? It was almost like being free. It was an amazing feeling that I wanted to bottle. And all I can say is I wanted to keep going. I will talk about the past because I'm old, and I'm still active out there. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 34,
Yay.
and I do vigils against the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq since 1991. And all I can say is I never thought I would live to see this day.
Isn't it great?
And let's hold on to it.
Beautiful,
guys.
beautiful.
Bill, you made this comment, and I really would love to hear a little more about it. When you talk about what did we learn, what did we teach, maybe you could give some examples of actions that you thought was being very successful, where a lot was learned and a lot was taught, and actions where that wasn't there. So, because it's not very concrete for me. I've heard you say this before, and I'm kind of confused by the point.
Well, I mean, I think that I think of a lot of things, but I want to echo what the brother just said first, and I want to say that until Occupy, the mythology of the 60s, which is mainly, sold back to us as myth and symbol. Nobody lives by decades. I don't remember saying in December 31st, 1969, oh shit, it's almost over. Let's get busy. Nobody lives like that. And when we say we're members of this generation, we are all an intergenerational people. We always are. We're occupying the planet together. We're occupying the park together. And so,
but we're learning,
one of the,
I agree with his spirit that we're learning.
Absolutely, because one of the worst things about the mythology of the 60s is the idea that somehow back then We had the best music, the best sex, the best demonstrations, and I'm here to say
well,
it's still
maybe
good.
one or two.
No, it's still good. It's still all good. And so let's not be
That broke
ridiculous.
everything.
And I think Occupy has put to rest that idea that the 60s had something all together. We're living now, we're leaning forward. Okay, real quickly. When I first sat in and disrupted a draft board, we were told that it was going to turn people off, that it wasn't going to work, that it was going to be a disaster. We were going to get beat up. We did get beat up. We did destroy some draft property. But pedagogically, we learned so much about the reality of the state. We learned a ton about how power reacts, and we taught the willingness to sacrifice. We taught the willingness to express ourselves, and agitation. We taught that imagination is big, and lots of people took our commitment and our condemnation of that war seriously, and so it had a ripple effect.
And everyone had a draft board.
Everyone had a draft board, so it became an obvious target.
Board.
So that's a pedagogical moment where we learn
every
something.
community had a
There are
draft
other times when you run down the street and throw a brick at a building and you say, gee, I felt good, I felt absolutely brilliant, and nobody got it. Nobody understood it. So what? So it wasn't pedagogically useful. That's what I mean. Sister.
It's good for you.
Thanks.
You mind? I assume you don't mind.
What?
Streaming, you're good with it? Is
Yeah,
it okay?
fine with it, fine with it.
Cool. Okay.
So I just like what you were saying about all these like big institutions that are crumbling and they're basically being held up by a facade. I find like a lot of people who don't want to understand what we're doing want to hold on to those because they're so afraid of they want to hold up the facade because they're like, how do we as we belong to like the arts, a lot of the arts groups in Occupy. Like we build like big puppets and do subway outreach and stuff like that. Like, what's the best way to reach people to tell them they don't have to be afraid? Like, I think that's what the fear is, holding all this shit up.
Exactly. Well, I think the arts are the best way. Arts and humor, that's another great one, If you can't laugh about, the human dilemmas, both on the individual level and on the big structural level, then there's just no hope and no spirit and creativity. And I think artists offer that, when you walked into Occupy zones everywhere, that there was kitchens and there was food and there were libraries and there was warmth and there were speakers, and there was also art going on, always, everywhere across the country. So I think that art offers us, a way that isn't like this, talk, to think about, using the imagination. And I think it is a scary time in America because we all of us, me, but all of you, grew up in a way with the fat of the land, and that is not here anymore, and everybody knows it's not here anymore. And you could come out of school with a huge debt, cancel the debt. You're onto these huge issues, cancel the debt. This was a demand of the third world in the 80s. It's now our demand. How ironic and how beautiful in a way, right? It's outrageous that countries, like whole countries and whole continents, feel indebted to somebody. Who? These banks? Who? The United States? No, that's crazy. Cancel the debt. And certainly students is where it's most obvious, but it's obvious for all of us. Credit card debt and everything, right? It's ridiculous. So I feel like those kind of imaginative ideas, they don't solve the big issues of where we're going. But you're on the track, I think, of where we're going. Where we're going is more democracy, always more democracy, more equality, pushing always for equality, and more peace against war and violence. Those are the three keys, and I don't know anything else.
But
I don't know the answer.
The other thing, I want to add two things to what Bernadine said. One is, we have just a huge embrace of those of you who are artists and using the arts for a couple of reasons. One is because, as Gwendolyn Brooks, the great poet in Chicago, said, when she was writing about the Picasso, which was a statue, and she wrote Dedication to Picasso, and it begins, does man love art? And her response, man visits art but cringes. Art hurts. Art urges voyages. And one of the great things about the arts is its generous not stingy. It's not didactic. It's not preachy. It invites you in.
Right.
So yes, the arts. But the question, what's the best way? No answer to that. And the reason is there are only 1,000 ways. We shall see what works, but we have to keep trying. But the reason we embrace the arts in part is because it opens up the imagination. And we have to begin to imagine a world without war, a world without prisons, a world without borders. And these are things that are very hard for people to wrap their minds around. It's often been said, you know, people can imagine the end of the world because we've seen it on TV and on the movies, but we can't imagine the end of capitalism. What the fuck would that look like? You know, but actually, I can imagine it, and I want you to imagine it. I think
we
that's
can't
essential.
imagine feeding ourselves or doing without all the, you know, stuff.
The crap,
all
yeah.
the stuff, but
The
actually
live streaming, what would we do if people weren't here? We'd be fucked, you know, we wouldn't know we existed. I feel special now.
So, how did you guys deal? How would you suggest we deal with the pressures of, you know, the government and so forth, and their interest in us? I mean, you guys had to hold up pretty strongly, had to have strong, you know, willpower to, you know, hold up. And
you have each other. It isn't an individual thing. You have a community. You have each other. And once you see what they do with that intense gaze on you, you know, that attempt to demonize you, just take Jeremiah Wright, Reverend Jeremiah Wright from the last election, right?
Lovely man.
An incredible guy, right? Self-educated, PhD, written book, literary, traveled the world, took his congregation on the south side of Chicago to Africa, was a major active force in this large congregation in fighting apartheid in South Africa and racism at home. And what happens to him? And he has this young couple come to his church, and they get involved in his church, and he marries them, and a whole lot of stuff happens. He's had this absolutely exemplary life in the church. And what happens to him? He's in a nanosecond demonized, right? Just boom, like that. And, you know, we now know that was paid for by a Texas billionaire, this ad, you know, and it's part of the election madness. And how do you cope in that, you know? So invite him
And
to
his way
occupy,
was
is what I'm
community.
saying.
His way was
he belonged to a very big community. That's exactly right. And he's a deep and fabulous guy. So invite him to speak. But, you know, you reject the demonization and reject the, well, you do, obviously.
And everything that happens to any of us, in a sense, happens to all of us. I remember when our kids, we have 3 grown boys in their 30s, and when they were becoming, you know, young adults, they worried a bit about the army, the draft. Is it going to be reinstated? And the one thing I remember that Bernadine said to them was, the one thing for sure is that if the draft is reinstated or if the military comes after you, it will come after all of you. You have each other, and that's all we have. We have each other, and the power of each other to solve problems as they come up. There is no ready-made answer that you can take off the shelf. There's only the power of us and the power of figuring it out in the moment.
Okay, you can go, whatever.
Yes, go forward.
Hi. Say
it loud.
Say it louder.
He's streaming.
One particular aspect of this movement that I found interesting since the beginning was that the labor movement came in.
Yes.
You know, including my own union, you know,
Right.
the IWW, and a lot of these different trade unions just came in afterwards, and they
The IWW came in, I'm shocked. That's shocking. Mainstream unions right in there. That's good.
But yeah, I'm talking about the more mainstream unions.
They did. They came up. They didn't. They came close.
Yeah,
I mean,
go
they
forward.
joined you for a nanosecond, and I think that's really impressive. And our spirit is to join them for a nanosecond, because obviously the people who are the attacks on public employees in particular are so severe and so symbolic of what's happening. Generally, we're going to attack nurses and teachers. That's really, and hospital workers and caregivers for old people. That's who is hurting Americans. It's like so transparent. So our solidarity with them, theirs with us. And
Anyway, you
one of
want
the
to finish.
beauties, though, about Occupy is that all over the country, I think, it goes to where the struggles are. In Chicago, been occupying the Board of Ed, you know, constantly.
New York too. Yeah.
Because you gave us all an image and an idea and a way of being.
I just want to ask you how'd you feel about that? You know.
You got it.
Yeah, I got it. I think it's fabulous. And I think, you know, then escalating it beyond where most of the unions are willing or able to go is also right. So the general strike in Oakland, holy cow, there's an idea for all
But
of
you
us,
talk
right?
about reframing, you know, the attack on teachers' unions, the attack on nurses, which Bernadine just mentioned. I mean, this is so much out of every autocratic and authoritarian regime that ever existed. They hate trade unions. So the fact that the right hates trade unions, then we have to ask the question. For example, about teachers. I'm a teacher. So what makes good? Good working conditions make good teaching conditions. Good teaching conditions make good learning conditions. How do we get good working conditions? When we heard that firefighter in Ohio say, when we go into a burning building, we have to figure out what the standards are to enter that building. I don't want a state legislator deciding how many of us go in and with what equipment. I want it decided at the bargaining table between firefighters who've been there and the people who everybody should be at the table. But the idea that the politicians would decide is crazy.
We have to talk, if we're talking in New York or Chicago about firefighters, we have to talk about the great victory of the Vulcan African American firefighters who held on all these years being kept out of a job in New York, and finally are getting a tiny bit of justice retroactively, winning their cases, hanging on and fighting for equality and for justice. So the question of access to these jobs remains, a vital issue.
What's it called? Since we're by a statue of Gandhi, I'll figure I'll tie one of his quotes into this question.
Right.
He once said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Personally, I believe that right now we're still in the laughing phase.
I agree.
What's it called? Once it does get more messy, I guess, with the fighting, how do you suggest protesters especially deal with not losing focus on the main issues of the 1%, the 1% income disparity, as opposed to police brutality, which obviously should be dealt with, but at the same time, there's a bigger issue, and why they're being brutal is more important.
Right,
But also, what's it called? And also what's the best way to try and keep as calm as possible on a march? Because
the best way is hard to say. But Bernadine has been talking about, we're organizing this NATO demonstration in Chicago. A large group of folks are mobilizing. We want you to join us. And one of the things that they're doing at the NATO demonstration is exactly what you're describing. They're saying it's too dangerous, don't come. They're saying you can have a free speech zone 3 miles away. They're saying, the draconian punishment you'll face.
You have to buy insurance in order to march.
If you parade without a permit, this is what you're going to face in terms of jail and so on. All of that is weakness. All of that is weakness speaking, and we have to be clear about that. I'll just change the Gandhi thing slightly. First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they try to co-opt you, then they beat the shit out of you, and then they repeat again and again. And the question of then you win is still up for grabs. We'll see. I don't think anybody can predict the future. I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist, but I think we have to go forward with confidence because we know the possibility is there. And that means there is no best way to counter this except that it's critical that we keep two things on the table. One is what we're fighting for. We're not just fighting for the fun of it. We're not just fighting to exhibit ourselves. We're fighting for justice. We're fighting for equity. We're fighting for peace. And we're disgusted with the fact that permanent war has become the main feature of our society, permanent militarization, and meanwhile the needs of people are not met. We have to keep that in front, and at the same time, absolutely expose the violence for what it is. Let's look at Cairo, Tahrir Square, for 1 minute. There was a lot of different things. The media kept framing it as nonviolence and resistance. There was a lot going on in that bridge, and one of the key things that people ignore in that Tahrir Square thing is the soldiers change sides. When they change sides, when enough soldiers change sides, they had guns too. I mean, then it was kind of a different equation of power.
Well, I think was also, Bill, I mean, I don't know if they changed sides, but they were unwilling to shoot down
their own
protesters.
And
that one time, that one marvelous night where they, they weren't even actual soldiers, but the renegade paid mobs came over the bridge with camels and, with tanks and so on. There was resistance then, right? The nonviolent thing threw them into the river, as my memory of how it went, right? It was, you had to stop them. And somehow people were mobilized and organized and able to stop them with their own hands and with their own bodies. So I think, you never know how this is, you just don't know what's going to come at you. But I think the key is to not get so fixated well, you've got the video, and sometimes the image will catch on and make it happen. You want this to be a space where you're inviting a lot of people to come and stay, and that will be both your safety and another escalation of challenge to them. But you need the people here, so let's tell everybody that Occupy is formally back in Union Square, and that people have to come and join you. And
Could we mic check
we'll
that?
come back.
And the question
Mic check.
Could we mic check that we're
Occupy
here?
is in Union Square.
Occupy
Join us.
is in Union Square.
Join us.
Join us. The other thing is the questions, and I think Bernadine was implying this. The questions are not primarily tactical. The questions are political, always, and that means you're fighting for a vision, for a morality, for a set of just and fair issues, and those things have to be on your banner at all times.
Yeah. And they are. They have been.
And they have been.
You've
I
been
don't know, what
brilliant.
are you
You've
really
been
saying
brilliant.
when you
I'd
say-
rather ask you guys the questions, because
When you're saying the questions are not tactical, they're political. What are you really trying to say there, and why would we believe it?
Well, because the question that gets asked is, what should we do tactically? But the real questions are, those things are flexible. We don't know. Nobody knows. Those things we have to be flexible tactically. We have to be clear on our principles, and the principles have to always be articulated, even as our tactics change and shift.
So just examples, when we occupied Columbia in '68, right? That was a tactic, but the point was to expose Columbia's participation in the war in Vietnam, which they lied about for 10 years. And there the students got the files in the president's office by occupying the president's office. And to demand that Columbia not expand into Harlem, while keeping Harlem out, while fencing them out, while barricading them like it was another country, and Columbia had the right to the property of Harlem, so they're going to build a gym there. So those were the two issues that sparked the Columbia Rebellion. Then a lot of things happened once the black students took over one building and told the white students to do it again. The white students occupied 4 buildings, and there was a dialogue and there was a conversation, and then finally there was the police brought in. But what was learned and what was exposed was Columbia is the largest, which it still is, private landowner in the city of New York, and a lot of other things. The secret participation in war research that ended up killing more than 2 million people in South Asia. So, there you are. That's like, it's not tactics, right? Nobody knew what to do. How do you tear down the fence and stop them from building a gym in Harlem? How do you find out what the secret strategy really is? It happened. It happened sort of accidentally. I don't know. How did Occupy happen?
When they tore down the fence,
The WikiLeaks of the
WikiLeaks
and
of the time,
incidentally,
exactly.
when they tore down the fence, they were called violent. And when we destroyed draft files, we were called violent. Just as Occupy is called violent, when you're doing nothing more than demanding that the public space be for the public. And so don't believe their lies.
You
and
people
expose
working
them.
inside city government today who want to support you. It's that inside out thing, So just remember how strong you are. I guess that's our only advice.
Bradley Manning is a great example. There was a guy assuming that Bradley Manning in fact did what we assume he did.
He is a great example.
There he had all these secret documents, and he released
The
them.
reality
There's a
is,
vulnerability.
everybody knows, we all know that 1984 is upon us. We're under constant surveillance. Take this live streaming. I'm under surveillance. No, we know
Say hi to the
that
FBI, by
everybody
the way.
knows that we're constantly under surveillance. What's great about Bradley Manning, what's great about Anonymous, is they say, we're watching you, watch us. And what did Bradley Manning expose?
That's treason.
That's treason.
Right?
Because you're not allowed to watch us watching you. And that's the brilliance of it. And so what did Bradley Manning do? He exposed the fact that they classify everything, the most inane, stupid, ignorant things, in a democracy where we are supposed to be the sovereign. We have no access to our sovereignty. Bradley Manning gave us that access. That led to Tunisia, that led to Tahrir Square, that led to Madison, and here we are. So let's celebrate Bradley Manning, let's defend Anonymous,
let's occupy Union Square. We have to go.
And let's occupy our imagination.
Thank you, guys.
It was so great to be here.
Come visit us in Chicago. We're coming back. Or come back in a couple weeks.
How much likely is will I get my ass kicked in Chicago?
What?
How much likelihood will I get my ass kicked in Chicago?
Especially,
Was there really a law passed that you can't film at the thing?
No, the law is that you can't film without permission. You can't film the police ever.
How do you get permission to film?
You cannot film the police.
So-
you cannot record the
So I couldn't live stream that.
That law has to be
Not
changed.
unless without their permission.
And I'm not going to get that.
I think they might not give you that. On the other hand, you know, you're smarter than that. So
That's why we need robot
Thanks.
photographers.
Thanks, guys.
Hey,
No problem.
Take care.
see you soon.
Take care of yourselves, all right?
Will do.
Be here when we come back.
Hopefully.
All right.
Do you a moment?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Word.
Like back in those days, how did you guys handle naysayers? Like,
Oh,
I'm pretty
same
sure.
way we do. Eric, thanks, man. Great to see you. Same way we still do. With a kind of mindless optimism, hopefulness, and a kind of unwillingness to be. You know, here's the real truth. And, you know, I get blamed a lot for being an optimist. I get accused of being an optimist, but I'm not an optimist. Because an optimist assumes that they know how things are going to turn out, and I have no fucking idea. Not only do I not know how things are going to turn out, I think it's unknowable. I think the future is unknowable. So I'm not a pessimist either. People who are pessimists and cynics think they know what's going to happen. I instead choose to nourish what I call a politics of confidence. That is, I get up every morning thinking, today I'm going to make a difference. Today I'm going to end capitalism. Today I'm going to make a revolution. I go to bed every night disappointed, but I'm back again tomorrow. And that's the only way you can do it. And I think you have to have a smile on your face, a song in your heart, use humor, use art. Go for it.
Word.
Max Graber. Very nice.
Thanks very much. Thanks, brother. Pleasure.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thanks for streaming.
Oh yeah. Okay, so I can guarantee this is gonna go in the archive. You got my word on that one. Rosebud, Florida. What's it called? All right, so that was a short discussion we had with Bernadine Dohrn and Bill Ayers. If you don't know really, it's totally understandable. Not everyone knows about this. Bill Ayers, I didn't know about Bernadine Dohrn either, but Bill Ayers was a member of the Weather Underground, a organization. I guess I'm not gonna call. They were an organization that stood up against the establishment. In the 60s. They were labeled a terrorist organization, and pretty much in my entire life I kind of agree with that. But after you know, other stuff, after knowing the definitions of terrorism, how that often shifts a lot, how apparently Saddam Hussein was labeled a terrorist until Bush wanted to deal with him. Then he took Saddam Hussein off the terrorist list, and then I'm talking about George H.W. Bush Sr., not George W. Bush. When he wanted to deal with Saddam Hussein, he took him off the terrorist list and put him back on afterward. So yeah, I have very limited regard for that list, even though my name might be on it. Oh well. What's it called? This is Union Square. We just had a discussion with Bill Ayers of the Weather Underground. I don't think the Weather Underground is probably over by now, but still, that was the issue then. Now we're in Union Square, just hanging out, enjoying the scene. His wife Bernadine Dohrn was here as well. Bernadine Dohrn, by the way, was labeled the most dangerous woman in America at one point. Yeah, go figure. So is Emma Goldman, by the way. That's what they said there. Anyway, this is Union Square. We're having a good time, hanging out, relaxing. I'll probably cut off and come back on at 11:30 around when we're gonna have Midnight Madness rap battles with the police. Join in and see how this is. Check it out, enjoy it. Otherwise, follow me, Stop Motion Solo on Twitter, Stop Motion Solo on Twitter, ustream.tv/Stop Motion Solo, fan page as well on Facebook, Stop Motion Solo. It's all Stop Motion Solo. What's it called? Also, If you can, there's a donate link in my Ustream. If you can give a couple bucks, please do. It helps to keep the string going, helps to keep all the fees good. Yeah, if you can, give a little bit, please. Otherwise, join the crowd, follow me, yeah, and stay informed, get involved, and be active. Stop motion out.